Okay, we're going to get started. אני רוצה לדבר באנגלית בגלל אני מדבר עברית לא טוב. So I'm going to speak in English. But you will hear me speak more Hebrew over the next days and weeks as I practice more. This is actually the second in a series of 4 that I've kind of been planning. I heard some good feedback from the first one that I did, and so I decided to do a series of 4 around careers, performance, building your success and your discipline at Microsoft. And so this is the second one, kind of talking about really the top 10 things I've learned in the past 10 and a half years at Microsoft. And I want to speak to you as a person, and because I'm going to reflect back on from when I started 10 and a half years at the company, through my phases as an individual contributor, as a lead, as a group program manager, and certainly some things here. So I hope to share these all with you. So why am I actually investing the time and giving this talk? Well, certainly one of the things that's very important that this has come across is MS Poll, so that people are very interested in their careers. They want to hear more about how to advance your career, how to grow, how to be successful at Microsoft. So I'm addressing that. I also like to share everything I've learned throughout my career. I really value when people take the time to share with me what they've learned in their careers and their life, and I like to do the same thing. Another is that I think that really making sure that you understand the Microsoft values and how they apply to your work and what you do every day is really a best practice for success at Microsoft and building your career. And also, I think as many of you will find that the people that if you're really invested in your career, you're usually the most happy, right? So the people that actually have an investment and actually spend the time investing in their career are usually the happiest at the company, and I think that probably applies to most companies as a whole. And as you know, I like to write, I like to talk, so here I am. So I got a little picture here of the leafcutter ant, and the very, very first thing that my first manager at Microsoft told me when I started, he said, "David, we could talk about the various performance management systems at Microsoft. They will evolve and change over time. There's some fundamental cultural things that will be here for eternity, maybe. But," he said, "in the end, when it comes to being successful at Microsoft," he said, "it's about making things happen. We can talk about objectives. We can talk about commitments. We can talk about goals. But in the end, being successful at Microsoft is about making things happen." And he says at the end of the day, when your manager looks at you, or the executives, said, "Who makes things happen at Microsoft? Who solves problems? Who invents solutions? Who is creative? Make things happen." And if you think about the leafcutter ant, when I was in Mexico with my wife on vacation, maybe 5 years ago, I remember watching these leafcutter ants. It was such an amazing experience of that. Whatever it took, they were going up over these trees and ropes and across this water to get the food to their little nest. They were doing whatever it took to make it happen. So this is the very, very first thing that I've learned, and this is the first thing I share with everyone that I meet in my group, and I'll never forget it. So, in the end, you look at, well, if this is really what it means, then what about commitments? What about, My Microsoft? What about the performance tools? Well, what about the CSPs? Well, these are really about tools that we use and how to measure, are you actually making things happen? They're tools. They're measurements. They're guides. So it's not really in conflict. And I think that there's a very, very strong relationship when you say your ability to be successful at Microsoft, or your ability to be successful and your actually achievements at Microsoft are really about your commitment to Microsoft. And I think there's a very, very strong relationship here. The people that I find, the people that are most committed to the success of the company the success of the individuals around them, the success of their organization, the success of their manager, the success of their peers, the more committed you are in that, the more successful you are generally at Microsoft. And bringing this all together, thinking about making things happen, asking yourself, are you the person, or are you one that actually seeks out these challenges and overcomes them? Every day. Honestly, every day I bound out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning and I think, what's my challenge today? How am I going to overcome this? And that's something that I've learned that's helped me in my success at Microsoft and my growth, is this is the way I think. I look at what can I overcome? What do I need to make happen today? So the second thing my manager told me was said, David, wherever you go in the company, make sure you are the expert at whatever you do. Whatever technology you're working on, whatever your role is, be the expert in the company, in that role, in that technology, in that feature. It will change over time, but ultimately you want to be the person that everyone in the company seeks out to find you because you are the expert. And if you're a manager, it's about being an expert people manager. If you own a technology or feature, be the expert in the company. Be the expert in the industry. Own it from beginning to end. Understand it. And you will find that the most successful people you actually will associate a technology, an area of knowledge with that person, and you seek them out for that knowledge or technology. So when you think about this, are you the go-to person for your feature area in the company? Are you the person that around the world, even here just in Haifa, are you the one person that everyone seeks out again and again for that one thing? If not, why not? If you don't have one, find one. This is really a best practice that I have found. Whether you're an IC path or a manager path or a technology path, pick your area and then really focus on being the best in that. We talk a lot sometimes about, in our engineering model and being an owner of your area. Take it and embrace it. Understand everything about it. Excel on every aspect of it. Do you know who your customer is? Do you know what the standards are for your particular area? Do you know how other companies use your technology? Do you actually know about all the code in your area? Understand and embrace every aspect of it. Are you really a discipline expert? And this is something I'll talk a little bit about in my next in the series, which will be early next month, is look at your career stage profile. Are you really a discipline expert? Have you embraced all of the competency areas? Are you really an expert on quality and performance and reliability and security and usability and localization? Are you an expert in all of these areas? That's just an example. And being honest, being an expert just doesn't come in days, weeks. It doesn't come in months. It sometimes takes years. Becoming a discipline expert can take years. That's not a bad thing. There's nothing bad about that. Building a career is a journey. It's a marathon. And recognize that building your discipline expertise, sometimes building your technology expertise, can take years. Certainly, I've spent many years of my career in PKI and cryptography, and I still don't consider myself an expert, compared to many others. But I spent, 15 years of my career learning and growing in that technology as an example, and now I'm expanding out. So, speaking of technology and building. So I think it's very, very important as a subset of that is, you look at how you build a house. You have to build your foundation, right? And being an expert and building a great house are really the one and the same. You can't have a great, beautiful house if you actually don't have a very strong foundation to build on top of. So sometimes when you're building a foundation, you have to recognize that it does take time to kind of cure and solidify, right? When you pour cement, you can't immediately start building on top of it. You actually have to wait for it to cure, to solidify, and be ready. And sometimes in building your career, recognize, looking at becoming an expert in your discipline, it can take some time to work through those experiences and build that knowledge to really be ready to build that next phase. And this often occurs not necessarily at the beginning of your career, it occurs in the middle of your career. Sometimes that really going to that expert level, that really senior, very senior level in your career is not, you build this foundation in the middle. And why do I say that? Well, how does it apply to the house analogy? Well, the house analogy, if you're building a home, do you just go out and just start pouring concrete? No. You develop a plan. You start clearing some of the trees and the brush. You start preparing the ground underneath. And there's many steps in getting there. And some of it will go quickly. Some of it will go very, very quickly. You say, I know what my house wants to look like. I know where I want to build it. I know how to clear the trees and the brush. I know how to prepare the land. But then, building the foundation, it takes some time. It has to go slow. It has to be done right. And sometimes in your career, that's the same thing. In that you may need to build some knowledge and stability to go to the next level of your development, the next level of your building. And make sure that you look at this in alignment with your CSP. Your CSP will guide you, in your proficiency levels, your competencies, your results of that, where you need to be and where you want to grow. I think that I look back a few years, and when I became a senior PM, I've mentioned people before, I was a senior PM. I was level 63 for almost 4 years. 4 years. It was the best time of my career. I was an IC for 4 years. It was the best time of my career because I look back on how much I learned and how strong of a foundation I built from that. How many things I learned in building and becoming a great program manager, and from all aspects, from customers, from quality, from design, integration, communication, collaboration. You think I know all these off the top of my head. I worked through that diligently and methodically, and I built such a really strong foundation, and I actually did move fairly rapidly after that. And I look back on it as, I'm not just saying this is how it's done at Microsoft. I look back on it as that I was able to do that because I built such a strong foundation with myself. All these basics on technology and all the aspects of my CSP. And so I'm sharing that as a best practice I learned, and I see for many others that do the same. So the last point I will make here is it's not just about how deep you go with your foundation, but it's how broad. So a foundation is sometimes depth. How deep do you actually put the foundation in the ground? But the breadth, do you actually spread the load out? Are you broad in all aspects of your discipline? And so this is something very important to think about, that you actually need both. A second thing is I'll say on building your technical foundation is I kind of learned the hard way a few times that it's very easy to jump in and take ownership of an area, take ownership of a technology, take ownership, especially as a PM. It's like, yeah, I know it. I've played with it once or twice. But I really learned that you really have to be an owner, to be successful at Microsoft, to be an expert, you really have to know your product. Just staying at the high level, kind of saying, well, I'll figure it out as I go along, or I think I know it. The moment you answer yourself or say to yourself, yeah, I think I know it, I think I understand it, I'll be okay, you're going to head into trouble. I learned this the hard way. And you see here, one of the things I really try to do as much as I can, every chance I get, I'm playing with TMG. Every time we have the bug bash and the UI bug bash, I'm in there, learning it, touching, feeling it, understanding what customers are doing, installing it, configuring it. I wish I had more time, but I know how important it is. If you're going to own a product at any level, you have to really understand it. You have to touch it. You have to play it with it. You have to understand it. Every week, when a little bit of my free time, I read another chapter in Thomas Schindler's book. I do, from ISA. Every week. Sometimes I'm going back and read it again because I don't understand everything. This stuff is hard. But I truly believe, based on my past mistakes, if you really don't understand what you own, you're never going to be successful. Sometimes we take ownership of things we didn't create. It's the easiest. When you create it from beginning to end, it's the easiest to actually understand it and be the expert. Of course it is. But that's not how things always work. We don't always have greenfield technology to start. We sometimes take ownership of other people's areas. And so this means you need to dig deep. You really need to look at the history. Why was it designed this way? How was it designed this way? Or how was it designed? What do I need to do to understand how it really works? And I think the deeper you dig and the more you understand, the more successful you'll actually be. So the last thing in building your foundation is it does take a personal investment. And there's an important point here is it's not just about working lots of hours. I've said this to many of you that you don't really grow by just putting in more and more work. There's actually diminishing returns. And I think that a lot of people make the mistake is that if I just work harder, I'll actually grow faster. You actually have to have a good balance. When I say it's the Microsoft 20% time, some people like to refer to the Google 20% time, which I don't know if you saw a lot of the recent blogs. It doesn't exist anymore. They cut it. But I call it the Microsoft 20% time. And what I mean by that is the 20% of time you make on a regular basis and your own personal investment. Sometimes that will be work. Sometimes that will actually be a new piece of code you write, or a new spec you work on, or a technology area that you get involved with. Sometimes it's research. Sometimes it's reading. Sometimes it's going to training. But you actually are going to build a successful career. It's about how you invest your 20% time. And also, note for some of the people that are runners in here, that it's a journey, a marathon. Pace yourself. Knowing if you're going to run 26.2 miles or whatever it is, how are you actually going to do it? Are you going to start running as fast as you can from the instant you start? Well, when I was in high school and I first started running cross country, I sprinted from the start, and I got about 1 mile, 1.5 kilometers into it. It's like, ooh, that kind of hurt, and finishing that 5 kilometers was really hard. And so then I started to learn to pace myself, and knowing when I needed to have that extra burst, making sure I also at the end, at that race when it's neck and neck, I had that last bit of energy if I needed it to pull ahead. But building your career is like that. It's like running. It's like a journey. It's like a marathon. You have to plan it, and you have to know when to expend your energy, when to pace yourself. And it's not just also about endurance, your stamina, but it's also the strategy and how you're going to win. When are you going to make that sprint or that burst of energy? When are you actually going to pass somebody? When are you actually going to make that personal investment? I've mentioned, to people that I also make it a family decision with my wife. When am I actually going to make a big investment in my career and spending some extra time? When am I going to pull back because I need some family time? I'm very transparent. Some people may think like, David, he's always going the extra 20%. He's always going really hard and strong. Truth is, no, I haven't. I have made times where several years ago my wife had spine surgery and she really needed me to take care of her. And I talked with my manager, I talked with my family. I made a big pullback in my career. It was the right decision. I'm very happy, that I made that decision, and it worked out very, very well. But I made a conscious decision about my career. It was a very strategic decision about how and when I was going to make that investment. And when she's well and she was healthy again, then I said, hey, I want to make another push, and it's going to take some time, or this is what I'm going to do. And she was there with me. And so it's a strategic plan, both with my family and myself, of when and where to make these pushes. So a little bit of a story here. I kind of found this on the internet, and it was kind of an interesting story. People say it's a fable. So there was this elderly couple. They kind of retired into the country, and they had a little bit of a cottage, overlooking in this kind of this rocky and rugged area. And early one morning, the woman, she kind of looked out her window, and she saw this man out there, working in not the yard, the land, and about 100 yards away from their house. He kind of had a shovel, a spade, and he was kind of, he also had a case, something was carrying along, and he kind of disappeared, out of her view behind some trees. She kind of forgot about it, and around the same time the next day, she looks out her window again, and there, he's got this shovel, he's got his case, and he disappears behind the trees again. So the woman mentioned this to her husband, and he said, "Well, he's probably a farmer, or he's a gamekeeper. He kind of takes care of wild pigeons or something like that, or he's setting traps, or he's doing something in the country. It's normal. Don't worry about it, even though it's unusual." So again, another day goes by, and she keeps seeing him out there with his spade and this case every day, going out there. So she says, "Come on," to her husband. "Go out, come with me. Let's go find out what this person's doing." And so they go out to where the trees and where he's been working. And so here they find in the ground, there's this big, deep trench, this hole that he's digging in the ground. It gets nicer and nicer. At first it's really rough, but towards the end it's looking very clean, very well designed. Certainly something's going on here. And she says, "Well, boy, this is strange. Why are you digging this hole in the ground here? And it's in a very difficult ground. It's lots of rocks and things like that." It's like her husband's like, "Yeah, I don't know what he's doing." So then the man comes out a little bit earlier than she's usually seen him, and she says, "Ah, you're early, but we were wondering, what are you doing out here? And what's in this case that you have? Why are you carrying this case?" He's like, "Well, I'm digging a trench, because I'm actually trying to get a job and digging trenches, and I'm going to be interviewed about how to do this, and so what I'm doing is I'm coming here to get the experience every day, and in the case I brought my lunch. So every day I'm coming here to get the experience so that when I come to the interview, I can get the job." Of course, he got the job. You get this as a story, but the point is, sometimes in the job that you want, the career that you want, the advancement you want, you really have to make an investment. And sometimes that investment doesn't come for free. You have to invest, you actually have to put a personal contribution into it. So I hope everyone gets the story. So the next thing, number 3, the things that I've learned. You have to be willing to take big risks. You have to take personal risks. You have to take career risks. You have to take technical risks. Sometimes you really need to trust your manager and say, make a leap of faith. Some people could say, well, moving to Israel was a leap of faith, was taking a risk for me. I didn't really feel that way. But, of course there was some risk, no matter how you slice it. But when we decided to move to Israel, there were so many things we didn't know how we would work out. What are we going to do with our house? We have a tuki, a parrot. How are we going to bring it here? What are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with our dog? Where are we going to live? We didn't know. But I said to Ryan, I'll go. We'll figure it out. I took a leap of faith. And we're certainly glad we did it. I look at Microsoft. When I joined Microsoft, I told some of you this, that after I finished graduate school on a Tuesday, on a Friday, moving van showed up at my apartment. Everything went into it, and I drove across the country. And I got an apartment in Kirkland, which is a suburb of Redmond. And I didn't have a job at Microsoft. I didn't even have an interview. But I knew I wanted to work at Microsoft. And I was going to do whatever it took to get a job at Microsoft. So I moved. I took a leap of faith. I took the risk. I knew it would pay off. It took me about 6 weeks. I started to get a little nervous, started to get a little worried, but eventually I got, and I'm glad I did it. It's the same thing as when I joined the military, even before that. Well, I didn't know how it would work out. I didn't know if it would be good for my career. I thought it might, but I took the risk. So in this, there will be small risks, there will be big risks. Don't be afraid to take them. Arthur, question.
So why did you join the military if you didn't know how it will be and what it will do to your career?
So the question is, why did I join the military if I didn't know what it would be like, if it'd be good for my career or not? So the truth is, when I finished my undergraduate studies, I felt that I kind of lost my competitive edge. You know, when I went to college, I was the top of my class, and at the end, I wasn't the best anymore, and I wanted to get my edge back. I wanted to be even more competitive. I wanted to be stronger. And I thought to myself, how could I possibly do this? And I said, well, there's the military. You know, the United States is a professional military. It's a volunteer military. I said, well, if there's one thing, the military will be able to do it. Maybe this is a big risk. Maybe this is a not so smart move, but I took the chance, and it certainly paid off for me. So that's the true story. Why I did it? Would I do it again? I don't know. There's a lot of questions in that. But the longer I'm out, the more I value the experience, and it certainly helped me. Donnie.
One, connecting, trusting your manager and taking risks. What's the connection?
So the question is, why do I say trust your manager and take risks? What's the connection there? That I'll say, you know, for my current boss, Ron pushes me to take risks and to move outside my comfort zone. Some areas that I say I'm not so comfortable, or I don't know that this will work. Ron, you know, pushes me to take risks, and some of them have been paying off because of the way he's pushed me. I look back throughout my career, and my manager said, Dave, I know this is outside your comfort zone, but this is what you need to do. Trust me. And sometimes, you know, there's not always the good explanations. Sometimes there isn't the time for the explanations. Sometimes it's just intuition that comes from the experience and knowledge of your manager. And I'm saying from my best practice, trusting my manager to take risks and leaps of faith has paid off time and time again. And I think it's something you should consider as well. That often with your great managers, comes with experience and knowledge, and will help you in identifying where those leaps of faith will be and where you'll most benefit from them. So good question. But also, I think that you'll find that, you know, all of your leaps and your risks will not always pay off exactly the way you wanted. There will be bumps and bruises along the way. You will fall down and stumble from time to time. And certainly some of the things that I've learned the most from are some of the things that you know, were mistakes. And it's about how you learn from your mistakes. It's about how you pick yourself up and take the next one. The worst thing you could do at Microsoft, I think, is to not take risks. It's part of our values. It's part of our culture. Take big risks, get big rewards. But also, if you take risks, it means sometimes we may fail. It may not pay off. Now, it's not saying that we should take negligent risks or some things that are taking the same risk again and again and not learning from mistakes. That's not good. But it's about how we take risks to get the biggest return from our investment as a company. And I remember about 2 years ago, Steve Ballmer, when it was in COSD, Steve Ballmer came and talked to the organization. He talked to, this was with the principal levels in the COSD division. And he said, I want people to take bigger personal risks, you know, in what they do. And someone says, but Steve, you know, that means it could really hurt my performance review. You know, if I take a big risk and I fail, it may really hurt my review. And he said, exactly. He said, exactly. That's what it's all about. Because we said he felt that as a company, we weren't doing it enough. We weren't doing it enough to get the big returns. And so therefore, people were falling into this comfort zone of, I'm not going to take big risks. And because we're not willing to take big risks and not willing to take personal risks, we're not getting the returns that we could. It was very insightful. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's rather easy to take risks because I don't have a family, I don't have anyone I need to support. But some of us, you know, come to work to support families, and taking big risks at this specific point of time when there's a recession and everything, it could kind of have big personal effects, unwanted effects in their lives.
So the question is around, if you take big risks at the wrong times, I'm going to paraphrase it and kind of put it into a context. If you take risks at the wrong time, or big risks at the wrong time, whether it's the economic situations or the environmental situations are difficult or different, then it can have a significant or severe impact on your personal life. And the answer is yes, of course. And so I'll answer in the context of taking risks isn't about taking blind risks every time. Yes, we all need to take leaps of faith sometimes, but also about taking risks is about thinking about when should you take the risk, when is it appropriate to take the risk, how are you going to mitigate the risk, what is the expected return on that risk. But also at the same time, as a company, as a culture, and I don't want this to be as a management philosophy, but as a company, as a culture, it's important that we're always finding when to take the risks, identifying them, and taking them. That we don't want to be a risk-averse company and a risk-averse culture where we take none. Now, each and every person, as I mentioned before about personal investment, we have to decide when's the time to do that for ourselves. We need to decide with both our family, as it was mentioned in the question, as well as ourselves personally, when's the time to do that, and when are we willing to take that risk with the reward and the consequences, of course. So in each and every time, it's going to be a personal decision.
Can you talk about the difference between you taking the risk and the fact that you taking the risk actually risk your manager?
So the question is, can you talk about the difference between you taking the risk versus putting the risk on your manager? Did I state that correctly? That's a good question. I think it's sometimes when the real best practice in that particular case is when taking a risk or versus putting the risk on your manager is about involving your manager in that. Is that it becomes a collective risk. It's that you want to take a risk, and you actually about getting your manager involved and actually buying into that and taking the risk with you. So you should never take a blind risk that your manager is not aware of, right? Certainly, you say the very basics of that's not managing up. You're not managing up appropriately. And so I think it's where your manager or your entire organization may be at significant risk, that you need to be inclusive. And maybe it's then not just a personal risk, but it's a collective risk, or it's a shared risk. So I think that's the best practice that I could answer in that particular situation. Okay. So in another fable of taking leaps of faith, so some of you may have heard some of these before, but I kind of like them. So there was a blind man. He had been waiting at the side of a busy road for someone to offer him some help across the street. And when he was standing there, he felt a tap on his shoulder and said, I'm blind. Can you help me cross the street because I can't see? And so the first blind man took the second blind man's hand and said, I'll help you across the street. And the person didn't know that he was blind. The person didn't know that the other person knew he was not blind. And so there's times that there's many times when we think that we can't do something. There's many times we think that we can't take the risk. There's many times that we think that it's not the right time. But being at Microsoft, and I'm saying being successful, the things I've learned is being forced to kind of stretch and take those risks, sometimes putting our own safety at risk sometimes, to discover new excitement, new capabilities, is really how you will grow the most in your career and will make the company the most successful. That I've never known anybody at Microsoft to be fired for making a single mistake. What I mean by a single mistake that they took a risk, they managed up that risk, it was known what that risk was, they managed it well, but it didn't pay off. What I see people get fired is when they take the risk and they don't learn from their mistake and they do it again. I see people fired for that reason. But if you actually say, I want to take a risk, you talk with your manager, and it's planned, and you work it out, and you mitigate it, you work through it. I've never seen anyone fired for that. But we definitely see people who are rewarded for taking those risks, stretching themselves, and winning. You certainly do see that. So another thing that I've learned along the way is know your customer. It does not matter what discipline you're in, what role you're in, where you are in the organization. Again, coming back to these are best practices I've learned are, do you know who your customer is? A lot of people says, well, I can't travel to... No, stop. You don't have to travel anywhere to know your customer. You do not. Ask yourself some things, right? There's lots of aliases. There's lots of DLs. Field, external, internal. Have you ever supported a customer on a news group? There's so many ways you can know who your customer is. And the better you know your customer, the better you will be, the more of an expert you will be in your discipline and in your technology. So these are just some general things that I've done and learned, and I think are best practice. Aliases, customer, focus groups, or news groups, white papers, KBs, deployment guides. How many people here have written a KB or a deployment guide or a white paper? A few, but not enough. It's not that hard. Again, it's a personal investment. The other thing I've learned is know your customer pain. If you feel the pain of your customer and you know the pain, you will know what the right thing to do in the product is. And the ultimately, most successful products in the industry are when you solve a pain. People buy things that solve pains. I use the word pain loosely. But when you buy a product, you're buying a product yourself as a consumer or as a company or as a customer. You buy a product to solve something, to fill a need. If you know a customer's pain, you know what their need is. If you know what their need is, you know what the right thing to do from a development perspective or a delivery perspective or a quality perspective. We always need to think about what is it that they want and how do we give them what they want, because that's where the money comes from. I mentioned this, I kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, is don't be in a hurry to manage people. Don't be in a hurry to be a people manager. I was an IC for quite a few years, and even before Microsoft and that. And I'm glad I spent that time building my experience and my discipline, building my industry experience, building my development experience. And I certainly found being a first-time manager at Microsoft, even though I'd managed people outside of Microsoft, being a people manager is much harder than it looks. And I think some of the managers in the room will attest to that. And rushing to be a people manager and rushing the preparation to be a people manager generally ends up with the wrong result. And a lot of times that I found that it was most important that I understood why I wanted to be a people manager first before actually being a people manager was one of the best things I learned. And in the end, one of the things, if you say, I'd like to be a people manager, the one thing you should be able to answer to yourself and to others is, what value will you bring to others? The one thing is, people should say, if you were to work for somebody, why do you want to work for that person? What value are they bringing to you? What is unique that they can give you that no one else can give? And as you think as a manager, making sure it's very clear in your mind, it's very clear in the minds of others of what that value is. If you can't articulate that, then maybe you don't have enough preparation. This is certainly something I've learned. In the end, a lot of people talk about people management is, when I ask them, I say, well, why do you want to be a people manager? Increased scope, increased impact. Are those the right answers? No, they're not. Because being a people manager is all about the people you're managing. It's all about them. It's all about what you can do for them, not the other way around. That's what people management is really all about. I'm speaking generically, and this is one of the things I've learned along the way. I've also learned Microsoft people are very demanding, and they're also not very forgiving when you make a mistake, or you let them down, or you're not there for them. They'll let you know very quickly, and you need to be ready for that. And you need to be ready for that commitment. I think a lot of people, I'm not fortunate enough to have children yet, But I know that as a manager, it's like having children in some ways. You have to be there for them, no matter what, because you're the manager. And that if you take that philosophy in mind, I think that's one of the best things you can do in your career on a people management path at Microsoft. Another thing is that when I think I learned along the way, when going from 62 to 63, going from, they didn't call it to junior or senior at the time. It was kind of junior and senior, but it was like between level 11 and level 12. But it's kind of making the shift to senior. And my manager told me, David, when you become senior at Microsoft, it's no longer about you anymore. It's about how you help others. Because being senior, you've got to there about being an individual, about making yourself great. After that, he said, it's all about making others great. Whether you're an individual contributor or you're a manager, once you become senior, level 63 now, and above, it's more and more about making others great, not just about making yourself great. And you start thinking, he said, you need to start thinking less about you, start thinking about how you invest in others. How do you help others? How do you help others grow? How do you actually make others successful? And said, you actually will move up the fastest and grow the most by the biggest impact you have on making others great. Kind of relates back to people management, but it's also, at this time, I was still in IC for several more years. And it's not about training. It's not about training others. It's not about going and just say, oh, here's how you write code in this way, or this is how you give presentations better, or it's any of the disciplines you can think about. It's about that personal investment that you make in others. It could be through coaching. It could be through mentoring. It could be through private results. I mean, I could think about how many times where someone needed help with a spec or a design or a connection or a presentation. And I went and helped them do it and showed them how to do it. I never got any credit for it. I didn't get any credit for it. But in their mind, I got a lot of credit. And many years later, I'm still benefiting from some of the things that I did. But they became my greatest advocates in my growth because of how much I had done for them. And also, if I learned how much I've learned through the process, how much I grew by learning about others, learning about what they did, and helping them through that. So, one of my favorite movies of all time, does anyone know what this picture's from? No, it's an American movie. Outlaw Josie Wales. This is Chief Joseph from Outlaw Josie Wales. A Clint Eastwood movie, an old movie, one of my favorite movies of all time. And there was a line in that movie, and it was talking about the plight of the American Indians and how they were being forced to move west off their land. And Chief Joseph was talking about when his people had met with, I think it was Abraham Lincoln. They kind of talked about his plight and Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln told him that you need to endeavor to persevere. Well, what does that mean? It means if you don't succeed on your first try again. You're going to make mistakes. Believe me, I've made some mistakes. You're going to fail from time to time. You're going to fall down. We know in our product, we know in our careers, we know in the work that we do, we're going to have setbacks. Sometimes we're going to quit. I know I've told some of you, there was a point many years ago that, and I apologize for repeating the story, but for those of you who haven't heard it, there's many years ago, I put as a PM about 400 hours of work into a PM design and spec. And this PM design and spec was for encrypting a hard disk, not using EFS, but encrypting the full hard disk, the whole volume. I put in hundreds of hours and working through every edge case and scenario and such. And it eventually went up and we did a big review on it. They said, this isn't the right time to do this. The value proposition's not there. We decided as a company, people are not going to buy Windows for disk encryption. And so we're not going to do this project. I was devastated. I put my best and hardest work of my career in. I was devastated. I wanted to quit, leave the group, give it all up. And it was a very defining moment for me in my career. Many of you know that actually what we have now, BitLocker, 3 years after that, actually all that work actually did pay off. It actually is now in the product. But at the time, I thought that I should just give it up just because I had a setback, which was I was building my whole career and promotion all around this work. And nope, it was canceled, out of my control. It was the right decision at the time, but the key point for me is that how I took that learning experience, that setback, what I consider my personal failure, all that hard work thrown away, and what did I learn from it? What did I learn? I learned, how to take, the decisions, how to look upon things positively, how to be able to move forward and never look back. How I could actually not be so emotionally tied to what I did. And that was a big important step for me as a program manager, is sometimes we get so tied and emotionally attached to everything we own, and then we lose our focus. We lose the objectiveness of what we're trying to do, and we won't let go when when we should have let go a long time ago. And this is one of the best things I think I've learned in my career, is not just about dealing with the setbacks and failures, but also knowing when to let go and when it's okay and never looking back. So there's another fable, along these lines, and there was one day there was a farmer's donkey, had fallen into this well into the ground, and the farmer's trying to figure out what to do, and there really wasn't. How do I get this donkey out? Right? I'm not strong enough. I don't have the capability. What do I do? So the donkey's old. Maybe I'll just let him die, leave him down there, and I'll just fill in the well. The well's kind of dry anyways. What do I do? And so I kind of gave up the idea of rescuing the animal, and so he tried to say, well, he's probably not going to suffer, or I don't want him to suffer, so what do I do? So he asked his neighbors help, and so what they did is they started to fill in the well. They started to shovel in the dirt and fill in the well, and realized, after a little while, what was happening is first the donkey is yelling and screaming and all upset, but then the noise stopped. And so the farmer was like, gosh, what happened? He looks down in the well, and he realizes that as he was putting the dirt into the well, the donkey was climbing onto top of it. And so as he's filling it in, the donkey kept stepping on top, on top, on top. And eventually, until the well was filled up, the donkey climbed out. And so even when you're feeling that there's no hope, there's no, you're in total despair, there's no way out, there's always a way out. Be creative. Be calm. Take a step back. And endeavor to persevere is one of the things that I've certainly learned. So, the end of this is he's saying that I kind of added that, sometimes life seems to kind of shovel dirt on top of us from time to time. And, we run into some of these challenges when partnerships with other groups, partnerships with third parties, working with each other. Sometimes we feel like someone's throwing dirt on top of us. The trick is, brush it off, shake it off, take a step up, take a step back. Don't let it affect you. And I personally think I look back as what I thought was going to be my greatest failure in my career. But certainly, I look back as one of my greatest achievements of how I learned, from that lesson. So, the eighth thing that I've learned, and the best practice, is you're not alone. There's a lot of people that you can ask for help and support and coaching. And when you don't ask for help, it's really hard to get help. You have to ask for it. Your manager is part of your journey, right? Part of, I think, what I've learned is it's really easy to tell your manager all the great things and how things are going well and all the things that you've done well. And it's naturally hard to tell them all the things that you're struggling with or the problems you're having or where you think that you're failing or where you're struggling. It's a growth area for you or it's a development area and you're actually struggling to achieve it. Probably the best thing you can actually do is being honest with your manager and saying, you know what, I am struggling with this. This is harder than I thought. This is my development area, and you don't want to admit that you're not achieving it, but your manager can't help you if you don't actually ask for the help. Mentors. I've mentioned this before in my first session. I'll probably mention it in every one of my brown bags. Who has a mentor? The numbers are up. We're getting better. Mentors aren't your managers, but they give you different points of view. And I also encourage people to look at peer mentoring. Look at your peers and how they can not only just inspire you, but sometimes they've been through some of the experiences that you haven't been through. They may have been where you've been. And they can give you a different perspective on how to solve problems or look through your challenges. Look for your role models. One of the things, the best practices, coming back to that is, when I have a development area or something I need to overcome, what I do is I look around the company, I look around to others around me, and I look at, well, what can I model myself after? That's just kind of who I am. I look for role models, and I learn from them of how to overcome my own development areas or my challenges. And I think it's a really good best practice. It's not about following one person for everything, but you say, I need to improve my communication skills. Find someone who you think has great communication skills and ask them for help. How did they learn to have good communication skills? How can you model yourself after them? If you're having a development area in the area of design, and find someone you think who does great design and go learn from them. And one of the best things I've learned are some of the one-liners that I've gotten from my mentor. Sometimes one sentence from a mentor can change your whole perspective on your career. I'll tell one. Everybody, it's interesting. One of the best lines I've gotten from one of my mentors in my career at Microsoft. I don't know if I've mentioned this in a talk before. And as a manager, it's very, very hard. Sometimes, you as a manager, we're always expected to know what to do. As leaders, we're always supposed to know what to do and where to go and how to get there and how to solve the problem. And we're continually running into bigger and bigger challenges. And the one-liner from my mentor one day was, he said, Dave, every manager and every senior person at Microsoft faces this, every day. And the fear is, his one-liner was, you wake up every day afraid that everyone in your organization is going to figure out you are a fraud, that you don't know what you're doing. He says, it's normal. Everybody wakes up every day when they get to these roles, and it's normal. And he said, so now that you know it's normal, now that it's the same way that every time you get up and give a talk in front of a group, you're going to feel nervous, you're going to feel scared, get past that. And it's okay. You can ask for help. And you don't have to be perfect. And so, does it look like I'm really comfortable up here and this is really easy? No. I'm just as nervous. I've got butterflies in my stomach. It's normal. But the idea is, you're not alone. It's normal. When you know it's normal, you can learn how to deal with it and how to grow from it. So number 9, I think one of the best practices that some people know about but don't really do actively is making sure you set your personal goals, right? It's sometimes hard to say, well, what is my 30-year goal? Well, gosh, I don't know where I actually will be 30 years from now. I don't have a 30-year goal, but I have a 10-year goal. And so make sure you're setting your goals out from the start. You actually, spending the time to actually think through where you want to go. Are you going to do a 5K run, a 10K run? Are you actually going to go do a 50K run? Because your strategy and your next steps may be different based on what your actual goal is. If you're going to do a 50K run, where do you want to be at each stage of that journey? Where do you want to be at each stage of your training plan? What skills do you need at each stage? What development needs will you have at each of those areas? What can you learn from your manager? Who can you learn from? Where can you ask? And I can't underestimate this enough. As you think about going into the mid-year and career planning, your development plan, really put some thought into where you want to be in your career. A lot of people just kind of fill in the career tool at Microsoft. Put some real thought into where you want to be, because I think if you really invest some time there and you start to work back, what your next steps and development areas and needs are will start to become much more clear. If you don't, kind of set those goals, you will find that you will struggle in what's next. I've actually fallen into this trap a few times. You kind of get comfortable, like, yeah, I'm happy with what I'm doing, I'm growing, I'm learning. What's the actual next step? And don't fall into that trap. Always know what that next step is going to be. That next step may be a 5-year step, but knowing what that is and how you're going to get there will allow you to map it out. The number 10, your career is in your own hands. There's nobody, there's nothing, there's nowhere, no time you can blame anything but yourself for your career. This is my best practice. It's in your hands. Don't blame your manager if it's not going the way you want it to go. Don't blame the system, saying, "Well, the system doesn't really allow for what I can do." Don't blame HR. Don't say that the CSP, the career stage profile, is ambiguous. If you think it's a little ambiguous, I'm going to do my next brown bag next month on this particular topic. But don't use that as a blame game. Don't wait for someone to contact you about your career. Take it into your own hands. You have to take personal action, because the result, is really based on your actions. That managers are obviously there for you, but your career is about you. Take it into your own hands. You need to drive it. And that's it. Questions?
Can I take it outside Microsoft for my children?
Questions? Can you take it outside of Microsoft? I hadn't thought about that. For your children, I think we're probably pretty comfortable with that. But I think if you want to take it to external people, we make sure we sanity check it for do an LCA check. But I'll take that as a compliment. Any other questions? Was this valuable? The next one is going to be about career stage profiles and how you can really drill into career stage profiles and really get the maximum benefit, from career stage profiles, and how to use them to your advantage. And keep in mind, this was my set of best practices that I've learned along the way. Doesn't mean that they'll always apply to you, but certainly something I've learned and I think are generic to most people. So thanks everybody for coming.